The dust hadn't settled from her mother's burial when Clara Whitman first saw the smoke rising from the Henderson place 3 miles east. Standing in the doorway of their weathered cabin, flour still dusting her hands from the morning's baking, she squinted against the harsh September sun. The column of black smoke twisted into the cloudless sky like a serpent, and her stomach clenched with a familiar dread that had become as common as drought in these parts. "Tommy!" she called to her brother, keeping her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Get inside, now!" The boy, barely 11 with their father's stubborn jaw and their mother's gentle eyes, dropped the water bucket he'd been hauling from the well. "What is it, Clara?" "Inside," she repeated, already moving to bar the door. Her hands trembled as she reached for their father's old Winchester propped against the wall. The rifle felt heavier than it should have, perhaps because she knew it held only 3 cartridges. 3 bullets against whatever was coming. 3 bullets, and her mother's voice echoing in her memory. "The Lord helps those who help themselves, child, but sometimes helping yourself means knowing when to hide." But there was nowhere to hide. Not out here, where the nearest town was 2 days' ride, and their closest neighbors, the Hendersons, were now sending their lives up in smoke. Clara had been 16 when their parents decided to stake their claim in this unforgiving stretch of Arizona territory. Now, at 21, she felt ancient. The land had a way of aging you, her mother used to say, before the fever took her last month. The land and the constant fear of what might ride out of the horizon any given day. "Clara, what's happening?" Tommy's voice cracked. He was trying to be brave, trying to be the man of the house now that it was just the 2 of them. "Hush." She pressed her eye to a crack in the shuttered window. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of amber and blood. For a moment, all was still except for the distant smoke. Then she saw them. They came like a dust devil given human form. A band of riders moving with terrible purpose across the flatland. Even at this distance, she could make out the distinctive silhouettes. The long hair streaming behind them, the weapons held high, the horses moving as one with their riders. Apache. Her mouth went dry. She'd heard the stories in town, whispered between the women at the general store. What happened to white women taken in raids? What happened to their families who tried to protect them? Mrs. Garrett had told her once, in hushed tones while selling her fabric, about her own sister taken 10 years back. "Better dead than taken," the older woman had said, her eyes hollow with old grief. "That's what I tell my own daughters. Better dead than what those savages do." "Tommy," Clara whispered, pulling her brother close. "Remember what Mama taught us? About being quiet as mice?" He nodded against her chest, and she could feel him trembling. The riders were closer now. She counted maybe 15, perhaps 20. They moved with the confidence of men who knew this land better than any white settler ever could. Her mind raced through their options. The root cellar was too obvious. The barn would burn like kindling. They could try to run for the creek bed, but Tommy's legs were too short, and the riders would see them in the open. A scream split the air, high and terrible. Clara bit down on her own cry, tasting blood where she'd bitten her lip. That was Mary Henderson's voice, Mary, who just last Sunday had shared her apple pie recipe after church. Mary, who had 3 daughters under the age of 10. The riders whooped in response, a sound that made Clara's skin crawl. She'd heard that war cry before, 2 summers ago when the Baxter Ranch was hit. They'd found what was left of the family 3 days later. "We're going to play a game," Clara whispered to Tommy, her voice surprisingly steady. "We're going to hide in Mama's hope chest. You remember how we used to play hide-and-seek in there?" "I'm too big now," Tommy protested weakly. "No, you're just the right size. Come on." She led him to their parents' room, where the large cedar chest sat at the foot of the bed. Her mother's wedding dress still lay inside, wrapped in tissue paper that crinkled as she lifted it out. The scent of lavender sachets made her eyes water. Or perhaps that was fear. "Get in, and no matter what you hear, you don't come out. Not until I come get you. Promise me." "What about you?" "I'll be right here. I'm just going to talk to them, that's all. But you have to promise me, Tommy, no matter what." His eyes, wide and frightened, searched her face. Then he climbed inside, folding his gangly limbs into the space. "I promise." She closed the lid gently, then dragged her mother's heavy quilt over it. It wasn't much of a hiding place, but maybe they wouldn't look too carefully. Maybe they'd take what they wanted from the main room and leave. Maybe. The pounding on the door came sooner than she expected. The wood shuddered under the assault, and she heard voices, harsh, guttural words in a language she didn't understand. Clara stood in the middle of the main room, the Winchester clutched in her sweating hands. 3 bullets. She could take 3 of them with her, maybe, if her hands would stop shaking, if she could pull the trigger when looking into another human's eyes. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. They poured in like a nightmare given flesh. Painted faces twisted in triumph, weapons gleaming, the smell of smoke and sweat and horse filling the small cabin. Clara raised the rifle, but strong hands ripped it from her grasp before she could even think to squeeze the trigger. One of them, younger than the others with fresh scalps hanging from his belt, grabbed her by the hair. She screamed then, couldn't help it as he dragged her toward the door. Others were already ransacking the cabin, overturning furniture, smashing her mother's china, tearing through their meager possessions with destructive glee. "Please," she gasped, the word torn from her throat. "Please, I have nothing. We have nothing." The young warrior laughed, a sound devoid of humor, and said something to his companions that made them laugh too. Clara's dress tore as she was hauled outside, the fabric catching on the doorframe. The late afternoon sun blinded her after the dimness of the cabin. There were more of them outside, some already laden with plunder from the Henderson place. She saw a bolt of calico fabric she recognized as Mary's, saw a silver mirror that had belonged to the eldest Henderson girl. No sign of the family themselves, and Clara was grateful for that small mercy. She didn't want to know, didn't want to see. They threw her over a horse like a sack of grain, her ribs slamming into the animal's side hard enough to drive the breath from her lungs. Someone tied her hands with rawhide that cut into her wrists. The world spun sickeningly as the horse began to move. Behind them, smoke began to rise from her home. Everything her parents had built, everything her mother had loved, going up in flames. And somewhere in that inferno was Tommy, hidden in a cedar chest that would become either his salvation or his coffin. Clara squeezed her eyes shut and prayed, not for herself, but for her brother. Let him stay quiet. Let him stay hidden. Let someone find him before the smoke did. As the raiding party thundered west toward the setting sun, Clara Whitman left behind everything she had ever known. Ahead lay only uncertainty, fear, and the terrible stories whispered between women who knew that some fates were worse than death. The young warrior who had taken her rode close, occasionally looking back at her with eyes that held no mercy, only the satisfied gleam of a successful hunt. The last thing she saw before the darkness of shock finally claimed her was her home, now a pillar of fire against the darkening sky, and the knowledge that she would never see it again. Whatever came next, whatever horrors awaited her in the Apache camp, Clara Whitman, the settler's daughter, was already dead. What remained was only a frightened woman clinging to the last shreds of dignity, praying that when the final degradation came, she would find the strength to face it without breaking entirely. But she would break. They always did. And in her fading consciousness, she could already hear her mother's voice, gentle and sad. "Sometimes, child, surviving means letting parts of yourself die so that others might live." The prairie swallowed them whole, and the smoke of burning dreams was the only witness to what had been lost that day. The fire had burned low when Clara finally stirred. She lay on hard-packed earth, her body a map of aches and bruises from the ride. The smell of smoke and roasted meat filled her nostrils, mixing with the unfamiliar scents of sage and leather. Voices rose and fell around her in that harsh language she couldn't understand, punctuated by occasional laughter. She kept her eyes closed, feigning unconsciousness while trying to orient herself. Her wrists were still bound, the rawhide having cut deep grooves into her skin. Her dress, her mother's carefully mended calico, was torn and filthy. But she was alive, and more importantly, she was still clothed. That had to count for something. "She wakes." The voice was deep, speaking English with a heavy accent. Clara's eyes flew open to find a warrior crouched beside her. He was different from the others she'd glimpsed during the raid. older, perhaps 30 summers, with a scar running from his left temple down to his jaw. While the other warriors wore their hair long and loose, his was pulled back, revealing a face that might have been handsome once before hardship carved its lines deep. He studied her with dark eyes that held none of the wild triumph she'd seen in the younger warriors. Instead, there was something else, a weight, a weariness that seemed at odds with his powerful frame. Water? He held out a gourd. Clara's throat burned with thirst, but she turned her face away. Her mother had always said pride was a sin, but it was all she had left now. The warrior, she couldn't think of him any other way, set the gourd within reach and moved back. He said something to the others in their language, his tone carrying an edge of authority. The younger warrior who had taken her, the one with the scalps, responded angrily. An argument erupted, voices rising, hands moving to weapons. The scarred warrior stood slowly, his movement deliberate and dangerous. He spoke again, quieter this time, but something in his tone made the younger man step back. The camp fell silent, except for the crackling fire. Clara watched this exchange through her lashes, trying to understand the dynamics. The scarred one clearly held some rank, but there was tension there, an undercurrent of resentment from the others. When he turned back to her, she quickly closed her eyes again. "You can stop pretending," he said in that same deep voice. "Yellowhair knows you watch." Yellowhair? Was that his name? It seemed wrong. His hair was black as midnight, unless it meant something else, something from his past. She opened her eyes to find him sitting cross-legged a respectful distance away, cleaning a rifle with practiced movements, not looking at her directly, giving her the illusion of privacy in this very public space. "My name is—" she started, then stopped. What did it matter? Clara Whitman was dead. That girl had burned with her home. "Names come later," he said. "First, you survived tonight." The way he said it made her blood chill. "What happens tonight?" He continued cleaning the rifle, not answering directly. "You have people who will pay ransom?" "No." The word came out as a whisper. "My parents are dead. There's only—" She bit her tongue before mentioning Tommy. "There's no one—" Something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment? Relief? She couldn't tell. The younger warriors were growing restless. She could feel their eyes on her, hear their low comments followed by rough laughter. One of them, bold with drink or youth, approached. He reached for her torn sleeve, and Clara instinctively jerked away. The scarred warrior's hand moved so fast she barely saw it. Suddenly, a knife point rested against the younger man's wrist. Words were exchanged, low and deadly. The younger warrior backed away, but his eyes promised retribution. "Why?" Clara asked when they were alone again. "Well, as alone as one could be in a camp of 30 or more." "Why did you stop him?" The warrior, she still didn't know his name, finally looked at her directly. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" But he was already rising, moving away. He spoke to an older woman who had been tending the fire. The woman, her face a map of hard years, approached Clara with a bundle of cloth. "You change," she said in broken English. "That dress." She made a tearing motion. "No good." Clara looked down at her mother's calico, now more rips than fabric. The woman was right, but changing meant accepting this, meant admitting that Clara Whitman was truly gone. The older woman seemed to understand her hesitation. Her weathered face softened slightly. "You change, or they change you. Which you choose." When put that way, the choice was clear. Clara nodded, and the woman cut her bonds with a swift motion. Clara's hands screamed as blood rushed back into them, but she bit back any sound of pain. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. The clothes were simple, a hide skirt and loose shirt that smelled of smoke and sage. As Clara changed behind a blanket, the woman held up. She could hear the camp settling for the night. The younger warriors were still drinking, their voices growing louder and more aggressive. She dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with unfamiliar ties and fastenings. When she emerged, the scarred warrior was back. He looked at her once, nodded as if satisfied, then gestured for her to sit by the smaller fire where the women gathered. It was segregation, she realized. Protection of a sort. "Thank you," she said, though the words tasted like ash. He didn't acknowledge her gratitude. Instead, he positioned himself between her and the main group of warriors, cleaning weapons with methodical precision, a self-appointed guardian, though she couldn't fathom why. As the night wore on, Clara found herself studying him despite herself. He was different from the others, set apart not just by his scars, but by something indefinable. While the others celebrated their raid with increasing abandon, he remained watchful, sober. When the younger warrior's eyes turned her way, he was always there, a silent barrier. "What's your name?" she finally asked when the fire had burned low and most of the camp slept. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "They call me Natuche, in your tongue." He paused, seeming to weigh whether to continue. "It means he who seeks. What do you seek?" His scarred face turned toward the dying fire. "What all men seek, what cannot be found." Clara pulled the rough blanket tighter around her shoulders. The desert night was cold, so different from the stifling days. "You said I reminded you of someone." "Sleep," he said, not unkindly, but with finality. "Tomorrow brings its own troubles." But sleep wouldn't come. Every time Clara closed her eyes, she saw her burning home. Imagined Tommy in that chest, praying someone would come. Had anyone found him? Was her little brother even now? "You weep for the dead?" Natuche's voice came from the darkness. "For the living," she whispered. He made a sound that might have been understanding. "The living suffer more." As if to prove his point, one of the younger warriors stumbled over, drunk on victory and whatever liquor they'd plundered. He spoke to Natuche in slurred syllables, gesturing at Clara. The message was clear, even without understanding the words. Natuche rose smoothly, placing himself between Clara and the drunk. More words were exchanged, the tension ratcheting higher. The younger warrior's hand went to his knife. It happened so fast Clara almost missed it. One moment the two men were facing off. The next the younger warrior was on the ground, Natuche's knee on his chest, a blade at his throat. The camp stirred, warriors reaching for weapons. But Natuche spoke in a carrying voice that made them pause. When he finally released the younger man, there was blood on the ground. Not much, just enough to make a point. The warrior slunk away, one hand pressed to his throat. Natuche returned to his position by the fire as if nothing had happened, but Clara noticed he kept his weapons closer now, and his eyes never stopped moving. "You've made an enemy," she said quietly. "I have many enemies." He glanced at her, and for a moment she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not desire, not cruelty, but a bone-deep exhaustion. "One more change is nothing. Why protect me? I'm nothing to you, to any of you." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as if seeing something beyond the firelight. "Once, there was a girl, my sister, younger than you. The white soldiers came while the men were hunting. When we returned..." He touched the scar on his face absently. "I found her by the river, what they left of her." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. Your sorrow changes nothing. But perhaps..." He shook his head. "Perhaps the spirits test me. Perhaps they send you to see if I have learned to be better than my enemies. And have you?" His smile was sharp as a blade. "The night is not over." They sat in silence as the camp slept around them. Clara found herself oddly comforted by his presence, this scarred warrior who held himself apart from his own people to protect a woman he didn't know. It didn't make him good. She'd seen him ride with the others, knew he had blood on his hands. But in this moment, he was all that stood between her and a fate that made her stomach clench with terror. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, Natuche finally spoke again. "They will trade you in Mexico. That is the plan. But the journey is long and men grow impatient." He looked at her directly. "Stay close to the women. Do not meet the young ones' eyes. And when they tell you to do something, do it. Pride is luxury you cannot afford." "Like your sister couldn't afford it?" His face went stone still. For a moment, she thought he might strike her. Then something shifted in his expression. "Yes," he said simply, like she could not afford it. As the camp began to wake, Clara realized that she had survived her first night. Not unscathed. Her wrists were raw, her body bruised, her spirit battered, but alive. and under the protection, however temporary, of a man whose own wounds ran deeper than any scar. She didn't know what the coming days would bring, but as she watched Na-Tu-Che rise and face the new day, she understood one thing. In this harsh land where cruelty was currency and mercy was weakness, she had found an unlikely guardian. A warrior who sought something he couldn't name, who saw in her a ghost from his past, and who might, just might, be her only hope of survival. The sun rose full, painting the desert in shades of gold and blood, and Clara Whitman, who was learning to be someone else entirely, rose to meet it. The desert was a furnace by midday. Clara's lips cracked and bled, her throat so parched that swallowing felt like gulping sand. The rough hide clothing chafed against her sunburned skin, and her feet, unused to the pace, had blistered inside the unfamiliar moccasins the old woman had given her. They'd been riding for 3 days now, pushing hard toward the Mexican border. The warriors rode with casual grace, at one with their horses, while Clara clung desperately to her mount, her bound hands making balance nearly impossible. Every mile took her further from any hope of rescue, deeper into a wilderness that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. Na-Tu-Che rode nearby, but never directly beside her, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to avoid drawing more resentment from the others. The young warrior he'd bloodied that first night, she'd learned his name was Bidsil, watched them both with eyes that promised vengeance. On the third night, the rains came. It started as a distant rumble, thunder rolling across the mesas like war drums. The warriors made camp quickly in a box canyon, seeking shelter beneath overhanging rocks. Clara helped the women gather the horses, her movements automatic now, driven by exhaustion and the simple need to be useful, to be seen as more than mere cargo. When the sky opened, it was biblical. Water cascaded down the canyon walls in sheets, turning the dry riverbed into a raging torrent within minutes. The horses screamed and pulled at their tethers. Lightning split the sky, illuminating faces painted in stark relief, some excited by nature's violence, others wary of the flash flood risk. Clara huddled beneath a ledge, shivering as the temperature plummeted. The rain had soaked through everything, and the desert night was merciless to wet flesh. She watched Na-Tu-Che moving among the horses, calming them with a touch, his scarred face serene despite the chaos. "You!" She looked up to find Bidsil standing over her, rain streaming down his painted face. 2 other young warriors flanked him. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Come, you help with horses." It was clearly a ruse, but what choice did she have? Clara rose on shaking legs, glancing around for Na-Tu-Che. He was nowhere to be seen in the storm's fury. They led her away from the main camp, toward where some pack horses had been tethered. The rain provided cover, muffling sounds, reducing visibility. Clara's mind raced. She could run, but where? Into the flood? Into the desert? Bidsil grabbed her arm, spinning her around. His companions laughed, closing in. One reached for her hair, and Clara did the only thing she could think of. She screamed. The sound was swallowed by thunder, but it was enough. Na-Tu-Che materialized from the rain like a spirit of vengeance. No words this time. His fist connected with Bidsil's jaw with a crack audible even over the storm. The younger warrior went down hard, and his companions backed away as Na-Tu-Che drew his knife. "Enough." The voice belonged to the raid leader, a grizzled warrior named Kuruk. He stood at the edge of their circle, rain running off his eagle feathers. "This quarrel ends now." Bidsil spat blood, struggling to his feet. He spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing between Na-Tu-Che and Clara. Kuruk listened, his weathered face impassive. Finally, the leader spoke, his words careful and measured. Na-Tu-Che's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. Kuruk turned to Clara, surprising her with English. "You caused trouble. Warriors fight over white woman. This is bad for raid." He studied her with eyes that had seen too much. "Tomorrow you ride with women. No more protection from Na-Tu-Che. He agrees or challenges my leadership." Clara's stomach dropped. "Without Na-Tu-Che's protection?" "I understand," she managed. Kuruk nodded, then barked orders. The group dispersed, Bidsil shooting one last triumphant look before disappearing into the rain. Na-Tu-Che stood still as stone, water streaming down his scarred face. "I'm sorry," Clara said when they were alone. "I've caused you nothing but trouble." "Trouble finds me without help," he said, but his voice was tired. "Come, the rain grows worse." He led her to a different shelter where the women had gathered. The old woman who'd given her clothes made space, clicking her tongue at Clara's soaked state. Natu Che spoke to her in Apache, and the woman nodded, producing a worn blanket. As Clara huddled under the minimal warmth, she watched Natu Che take position at the shelter's entrance, still protecting her even now, even after Kuruk's decree. "Why?" she asked. "You could have let them. You heard Kuruk. Tomorrow. Tomorrow's tomorrow." He didn't turn around. "Tonight you are still under my protection." The storm raged through the night. Clara dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. Once, she woke to find Natu Che crouched beside her, pressing a water gourd to her cracked lips. "Drink slowly," he murmured. "The desert takes moisture quickly." "Like it takes everything else?" she whispered. "No," his voice was thoughtful. "The desert only takes what doesn't belong. What remains is made stronger, or dead." A ghost of a smile touched his scarred face. "Sometimes both." By dawn the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. The desert bloomed in response. Cacti flowers opening, birds calling, the air itself seeming reborn. Clara stood at the shelter's edge, watching the sunrise paint the wet rocks in shades of copper and gold. "Beautiful," she murmured, then felt guilty. How could she find beauty here, in captivity? "Beauty exists everywhere," Natu Che said behind her, "even in suffering, perhaps especially there." She turned to study him. In daylight, she could see the toll the night had taken. Dark circles under his eyes, a new bruise on his jaw from the fight with Bidseal. "What will happen now, without your protection?" He was quiet for a long moment. "You will survive or not, but—" He reached into a pouch at his waist, producing a small object. "Take this." It was a piece of turquoise, polished smooth, with a hole drilled through for a leather cord. "I can't—" "It was hers, my sister's." He pressed it into Clara's palm. She believed it brought protection. Perhaps she was wrong. Perhaps the spirits will be kinder to you. Clara's throat tightened. "Natu Che." No words. Words change nothing. He turned away. "Today we reach the trading grounds. After that—" He shrugged. "After that, you belong to whoever pays most." The day's ride was brutal. True to Kuruk's word, Clara rode with the women, but without Natu Che's proximity, the younger warriors grew bold. They rode close, making comments that needed no translation, reaching out to touch her hair or arm when they passed. She kept her eyes down, one hand clutched around the turquoise. It grew warm in her palm. Whether from her body heat or something else, she couldn't say. By afternoon, they created a rise, and Clara saw their destination, a collection of adobe buildings clustered around a well, with corrals and what looked like a trading post. Her heart sank. This was where she would be sold, traded like livestock to whoever offered the best price. As they descended toward the settlement, Natu Che rode past. He didn't look at her, maintaining the distance Kuruk had demanded. But as he passed, he spoke just loud enough for her to hear. "When they examine you, show strength. Weak goods bring low prices. Low prices mean quick sales to bad men. High prices mean wealthy buyers who value their investments." Then he was gone, riding ahead with the other warriors. Clara straightened in her saddle, understanding. Even now, even when he couldn't protect her directly, he was trying to help her survive. The trading post was a scene from hell. Other raiding parties had arrived, their human cargo displayed like merchandise. Women and children mostly, some Apache prisoners from rival bands, Mexican peasants, and a few whites like herself. The smell of fear and unwashed bodies was overwhelming. Clara was pushed into a corral with other female captives. Some wept. Others stared with vacant eyes, already broken. A Mexican woman with a baby clutched to her chest rocked back and forth, singing a lullaby that made Clara's eyes burn with unshed tears. Through the fence, she could see Natu Che arguing with Kuruk and a fat trader in a stained vest. Whatever they were discussing grew heated. Finally, Natu Che threw up his hands and stalked away. As the sun began to set, the examinations began. Traders and potential buyers moved through the corrals, checking teeth, feeling muscle, assessing value. Clara forced herself to stand straight, to meet their eyes with defiance rather than fear. "Show strength," Natuche had said. When a prosperous-looking Mexican rancher stopped before her, flanked by vaqueros, she lifted her chin. He spoke to the trader, who translated. "He asks if you can work, cook, clean, tend house." "Yes," Clara said clearly. "I ran my family's household. I can work dawn to dusk without complaint." It was what Natuche had told her. Show value beyond the obvious. Make herself worth keeping intact. The rancher nodded, moving on. Others came and went. As full dark fell, Clara began to hope she might spend another night unsold. Another night where Natuche might find some way to what? Save her? He was one man among many, already in trouble for defending her. And she was nothing to him but a ghost of someone he'd failed to save. She fingered the turquoise at her throat. Somewhere in this brutal place, a scarred warrior who sought something unnamed had given her all he could: advice, protection, and a dead girl's charm. It was more than she had any right to expect. The stars came out, brilliant in the clear desert air. Clara found the North Star, the one her father had taught her to navigate by. It still pointed home, to a place that no longer existed, to a girl she could never be again. But she was alive, battered, terrified, forever changed, but alive. And tomorrow? Tomorrow was tomorrow, as Natuche had said. Tonight she would survive. And maybe, if the spirits were kind, she would find a way to keep surviving until what? Until rescue? Until escape? Until she became something the desert couldn't take? She didn't know. But as she wrapped herself in the thin blanket and prepared for another night of uncertainty, she held tight to a piece of turquoise, and the memory of a warrior's scarred face turned gentle in firelight. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was enough to see her through to dawn. The Mexican rancher returned at first light, but it was not Clara he purchased. He took 2 of the younger Mexican women, leaving Clara to face another day of uncertainty. The trading post was waking up, cooking fires, sending smoke into the desert air, when she saw Natuche approaching the corral. He didn't look at her directly, instead speaking to the guard in Spanish. Money changed hands. Not much, but enough to buy a few minutes of privacy. The guard wandered off to find breakfast. "Tonight, Kuruk moves the unsold to the southern markets," Natuche said quietly, examining the fence as if checking its construction. "The men there." He didn't finish, but Clara understood. There were fates worse than field work. "I know." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Thank you for trying. Listen carefully," he continued, still not looking at her. "When the sun is highest, there will be commotion. Horses breaking free. In confusion, the gate might open. A person might reach the mission 5 miles east if they ran quickly and did not stop." Clara's heart hammered. "Why are you—" "The mission helps all who seek sanctuary, even Apache sometimes, even—" His jaw tightened. "Even white women who remind warriors of ghosts." Before she could respond, he was walking away. Clara watched him go, her mind racing. An escape attempt. It was madness. She didn't know the terrain, had no water, no weapons. But the alternative. The morning dragged by with agonizing slowness. More buyers came through, examining the remaining captives with calculating eyes. Clara stood when they approached, answered their questions. But something in her manner must have warned them off. Too much spirit, perhaps. Too much potential for trouble. As the sun climbed toward its zenith, she positioned herself near the gate. Her whole body thrummed with tension. Other captives noticed her agitation. The Mexican woman with the baby moved away, not wanting to be associated with whatever foolishness the white woman planned. Then it happened. A thunderous crash from the horse corrals, followed by screaming whinnies and Apache war cries. Men ran shouting as dozens of horses burst free, scattering in all directions. In the chaos, Clara saw Bidzil trying to control a wild-eyed stallion, saw Kuruk bellowing orders, saw traders scrambling to protect their goods. The guard at her corral abandoned his post, running to help. The gate swung open, not wide, but enough. Clara didn't think. She ran. "Stop her!" someone shouted in English. "The white woman!" Clara didn't look back. She ran as she'd never run before, her moccasined feet flying over the rocky ground. Behind her, more shouts, the sound of pursuit beginning to organize. 5 miles, Natuche had said. 5 miles to sanctuary. The desert was an oven, the sun a hammer beating down on her head. Her breath came in gasps, her side cramping almost immediately. She was soft, weeks of captivity having stolen what little conditioning frontier life had given her. An arrow whispered past her ear, embedding itself in a saguaro cactus. Clara veered left, then right, trying to make herself a harder target. Her foot caught on a stone and she went down hard, skin tearing on the rocky ground. She scrambled up, leaving bloody handprints on the pale stones. "Please," she gasped, though she didn't know who she was pleading with. God. The desert spirits Natuche believed in? "Please, please, please!" Another arrow, closer this time. Her pursuers were gaining. She could hear horses now, hear voices calling in Apache. They were playing with her, she realized. They could have ridden her down already, but they were enjoying the hunt. A dry wash appeared before her, cutting deep into the earth. Clara slid down the embankment, stones tearing at her clothes, and stumbled along the sandy bottom. It provided cover but slowed her progress. Her lungs burned, her legs trembled, and she knew she couldn't maintain this pace. That's when she saw him. Natuche sat his horse at the wash's edge, his face unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met, and Clara understood. He had orchestrated the escape, but he couldn't be seen helping her further. Whatever happened now was between her and the desert. "The mission," he said quietly, then turned his horse and rode away. Clara forced herself onward. The wash curved, and suddenly she could see it. Adobe walls rising from the desert like a promise. A bell tower marked with a cross. 500 yards, 400, 300. The thunder of hooves made her look back. 3 riders were coming fast, Bitsil in the lead, his face twisted with fury. Clara's strength was failing. She stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. 200 yards, 100. "Sanctuary!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Sanctuary! Help me, please!" The mission doors remained closed. Clara's heart sank. What if Natuche was wrong? What if they wouldn't help? What if... The arrow took her in the shoulder, spinning her around. She felt the impact more than pain, a punch that drove her to her knees 50 yards from the gates. Blood bloomed across the hide shirt, spreading like spilled wine. Bitsil dismounted, approaching slowly, savoring his victory. He spoke in Apache, probably telling her all the things he would do now that Natuche wasn't there to protect her. Clara tried to crawl toward the mission, leaving a trail of blood in the dust. That's when she heard it. Bells ringing, voices raised in alarm. The mission doors burst open and brown-robed figures emerged. Franciscan friars, she realized through her dimming vision. They carried no weapons, but they walked with purpose, placing themselves between her and her pursuers. "This woman has claimed sanctuary," one of them said in accented English. An older man, his lined face stern with authority. "You will not violate holy ground." Bitsil snarled something in Apache, gesturing at Clara. Blood loss was making her dizzy, but she heard Natuche's name in the stream of words. "Nevertheless," the friar said calmly, "she is under God's protection now. Leave or face the consequences." For a moment, violence hung in the air like heat shimmer. Then Kuruk's voice rang out. The raid leader had arrived, and whatever he said made Bitsil step back. There was a brief exchange, Kuruk's tone pragmatic rather than angry. Business was business, and there was no profit in fighting priests. The Apaches mounted and rode away, but not before Bitsil spat in the dust at Clara's feet. She watched them go through increasingly blurry vision, searching for one particular figure. There, Natuche, hanging back from the others. He looked at her once, touched his hand to his chest in what might have been farewell, then followed his people into the desert. "Come, child," the old friar said gently, kneeling beside her. "Let us tend your wound." As they carried her inside the cool, dim mission, Clara clutched the turquoise at her throat. The pain was coming now, waves of it that made her gasp. But she was alive. She had run, and she had survived. "Please," she whispered to the friar. "There was a man, a warrior with scars. He helped me." "Rest now," the friar soothed. "You are safe." But Clara couldn't rest, not yet. "His sister," she said urgently, not sure why it mattered, but knowing it did. "He lost his sister. White soldiers took her, and he protected me because we all seek redemption in our own ways," the friar finished gently. "Even Apache warriors, even those we call savage." As darkness claimed her, Clara thought she understood. Natuche hadn't saved her because she reminded him of his sister. He'd saved her because he couldn't save his sister. In protecting one woman, perhaps he'd found a measure of peace for failing another. The mission bells rang vespers as Clara slipped into unconsciousness, the turquoise warm against her skin. Somewhere in the desert, a scarred warrior rode toward the setting sun, a little less burdened than before. And in her delirium, Clara whispered words her mother used to say, "The Lord helps those who help themselves." But now she understood it differently. Sometimes help came from unexpected places, from enemies who saw your humanity, from warriors seeking redemption, from the complex tapestry of guilt and grace that connected all souls in this harsh land. The arrow wound throbbed, but she was alive. Tommy might be alive. And Natuche had given her the only gift he could, a chance. What she did with it now was up to her. The friars prayed over her in Latin as they worked to remove the arrow. Clara drifted between consciousness and dreams, seeing alternately the cool mission walls and the harsh desert sun, the kind faces of priests and the scarred visage of a warrior who'd reminded her that even in captivity, even in degradation, the human spirit could choose compassion over cruelty. "Don't raise my skirt," she'd plead in her fever dreams. And in those dreams, a warrior with midnight hair and terrible scars would stand guard, would choose honor over violence, would prove that savagery was not the province of any one people, but a choice each soul made in the darkness. The mission held her safe as the desert night fell, but part of her remained out there in the vastness, connected by a thread of turquoise to a man who sought what could not be found, who had touched her life with unexpected mercy, and who had shown her that sometimes the greatest courage was not in taking what you could, but in protecting what you shouldn't. The wound had festered for 3 days before Clara's fever finally broke. She woke to find Sister Magdalena's weathered face hovering over her, rosary beads clicking softly as the old nun prayed. The mission infirmary was sparse but clean, smelling of sage and carbolic. "Ah, child," Sister Magdalena said in accented English. "Welcome back to the living." Clara tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. The nun helped her sip water, supporting her head with surprising gentleness for such work-worn hands. "How long?" Clara finally managed. 4 days since the Apache brought you to our door." "They didn't bring me. I ran—" "Hush." Sister Magdalena adjusted Clara's bandages. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. Rest now." But Clara couldn't rest. Her dreams were haunted by smoke and screams, by Tommy's face, by a scarred warrior standing guard in firelight. When she did sleep, she often woke calling out in the night, her hands clutching at a turquoise that was no longer there. Sister Magdalena had removed it to tend her wounds. On the 5th day, Father Francisco came to see her. The elderly priest who had faced down Bidsil settled himself on a stool beside her bed, his face kind but grave. "You are healing well," he said. "Soon you must decide what comes next." "I need to go home," Clara said immediately. "My brother." "I have sent word to the territorial authorities about the raid. They will search for survivors." His tone suggested he held little hope. "But child, even if your brother lives, you cannot simply return to what was." Clara knew he was right. The farm was gone. She had no money, no family beyond Tommy, no way to rebuild. And she was marked now. Everyone would know she'd been taken by Apaches. In the eyes of frontier society, she was ruined. "Then what do I do?" Father Francisco studied her carefully. "Some women in your position stay with us, take vows, dedicate their lives to God's service. Others, we can arrange passage east, to relatives perhaps." "I have no one in the east." Clara touched her shoulder where the arrow wound throbbed. "And I don't think God wants me for a nun." The priest smiled slightly. "God wants all his children, but he calls them to different paths." He rose, joints creaking. Think on it. Pray on it. When you are stronger, we will speak again." Days blended into each other. Clara helped in the kitchen when she could, learning to make tortillas from Sister Magdalena, finding comfort in simple tasks. The other sisters were kind but distant. She was not the first woman to seek sanctuary here, and they'd learned not to grow too attached to those who would eventually leave. At night, she stood in the mission courtyard, looking out at the desert. Somewhere out there, Natuche rode with his people. Did he think of her? Did he regret helping her? She fingered the place where the turquoise should rest, missing its weight. 2 weeks after her arrival, commotion in the courtyard drew her from the chapel where she'd been attempting prayer. A cavalry unit had arrived, dust-covered soldiers watering their horses at the well. Clara's heart leaped. Perhaps they had news of Tommy. The captain was a hard-faced man named Morrison, his uniform faded from sun and service. He listened to Father Francisco's account of Clara's arrival with obvious skepticism. "Miss Whitman," he said when they were introduced, "I'm afraid I have difficult news. We found your homestead, or what was left of it." Clara gripped the back of a chair. "My brother? No sign of a boy, living or dead. We did find—" He hesitated. "We found remains in the root cellar. A man, from what we could tell. Maybe a hired hand?" The root cellar. Not the bedroom. Not the hope chest. Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief. Tommy might have survived. "No," she said. "We had no hired help. It must have been someone else." Morrison's eyes sharpened. "You're certain? Because if the boy was taken, I don't know what happened after they took me." It wasn't quite a lie. She didn't know for certain. There was so much chaos. The captain questioned her about her captivity, his queries becoming increasingly personal. "How many warriors? Where did they camp? What did they do to her?" The last question hung in the air like a threat. "They were taking me to Mexico to sell," Clara said evenly. "A warrior named Natuche He protected me from harm." Morrison's face darkened. "Protected you? An Apache buck?" He laughed, ugly and knowing. "Miss, I've been fighting these savages for 10 years. They don't protect white women. They—" "Captain Morrison." Father Francisco's voice cut through sharply. "You are in God's house. You will speak with respect." The two men locked eyes. Finally, Morrison looked away. "My apologies, Father. Miss Whitman." He didn't sound sorry. "We're mounting a punitive expedition against the Apache bands in this region. Your testimony could help us locate them." Clara thought of Natuche, of the turquoise that had been his sister's, of the risk he'd taken to engineer her escape. "I was blindfolded most of the time. I couldn't tell you where we went." Morrison studied her for a long moment. "I see. Well, if your memory improves—" He left the threat unspoken. "We'll be in the area for another week." After he left, Clara found herself shaking. Father Francisco guided her to a bench, his face troubled. "That man believes that I've been—" She couldn't say the words. "What men believe and what God knows are often different things," the priest said gently. "But child, the captain is not wrong about one thing. The world will not be kind to you now. Perhaps you should reconsider our offer of sanctuary." That night, Clara lay awake thinking. She could stay here, safe behind mission walls, spending her life in prayer and service. It wasn't a bad life, but it wasn't her life. Somewhere out there, Tommy might be alive, might need her. And somewhere else, a scarred warrior rode with ghosts, having risked everything to give her freedom. She rose before dawn and went to the chapel. But instead of praying, she found herself speaking to the carved wooden Christ above the altar. "I don't know if you're listening," she whispered. "I don't know if you care about what happens to women like me, but he did, a heathen, a savage, a man who should have been my enemy. He cared. He saw me as human when his own people saw me as goods, when my own people now see me as ruined." The statue remained silent, but morning light through the windows caught the painted wounds on the wooden flesh. Wounds given by those who should have known better. Wounds that marked but did not define. "Please," Clara whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was asking for. Understanding, forgiveness, a path forward that didn't require her to hide behind walls for the rest of her life. A hand touched her shoulder. Sister Magdalena stood beside her, holding something wrapped in cloth. "This was in your clothing when you arrived," the nun said. pressing the bundle into Clara's hands. "I cleaned it, kept it safe." Clara unwrapped the cloth with trembling fingers. The turquoise gleamed in the morning light, its leather cord replaced with a silver chain. "Sister Magdalena's work. He gave this to me," Clara said softly. "The warrior. It was his sister's." Sister Magdalena nodded. "Then it is precious twice over, once for the love it first held, again for the grace it brought to you." She helped Clara fasten the chain around her neck. "Not all angels wear white wings, child. Sometimes they come with scars and sorrow, teaching us that mercy can bloom in the hardest ground." Some. Clara touched the stone where it rested against her heart. "Captain Morrison would call that blasphemy. Captain Morrison has not walked your path." The old nun's eyes were knowing. "God's mercy takes many forms. Who are we to say which ones are acceptable?" They stood together as the chapel filled with golden light, and for the first time since her ordeal began, Clara felt something other than fear or grief. Not quite peace, that would take longer, but a sense that her story wasn't over, that survival meant more than just drawing breath. "I need to find my brother," she said finally. "I need to know what happened to him." Sister Magdalena nodded. "Then you must go with God. But first, you must heal, and perhaps you must learn to see yourself as more than what was done to you or not done to you. You are a woman who ran 5 miles through the desert with an arrow in her shoulder. You are a woman who earned the protection of an enemy warrior. You are a woman who survived." Clara clutched the turquoise, feeling its smooth surface warm under her fingers. Somewhere, Natuche rode under the same vast sky. She wondered if he thought of his sister when he looked at the stars. She wondered if helping Clara had eased that old wound, or only deepened it. "Don't raise my skirt," she had begged in those first terrible moments of captivity. And he hadn't. He'd raised something else instead. Her understanding of what humanity could mean, even in the darkest places. He'd shown her that honor could exist in unexpected hearts, that mercy could flow between enemies, that sometimes the greatest violence was in refusing to see the person behind the label of other. Morrison would return, would pressure her for information that could lead to Natuche's death. The world would whisper about what had happened to her in Apache hands, but Clara would hold her truth close, like the turquoise against her heart, that in her greatest moment of vulnerability, a warrior had chosen to see her humanity, and in doing so, had revealed his own. The chapel bells rang, calling the faithful to morning prayers. Clara rose, no longer the frightened girl who had been dragged from her burning home. She was something new now, forged in desert fire and marked by unlikely grace. And whatever came next, she would meet it standing. 3 months had passed since Clara's escape, and the desert winter had turned the nights bitter cold. She'd taken work at the mission, helping with the sick who came seeking aid, earning her keep while her body and spirit slowly mended. The arrow wound had healed to a puckered scar, a permanent reminder of her flight to freedom. It was during such a night, as she tended the fire in the infirmary, that they brought him in. Clara heard the commotion first. Horses arriving fast, voices raised in urgency. Sister Magdalena appeared at the door, her face grave. "Clara, we need your help, but you must prepare yourself." Before Clara could ask what she meant, 2 Mexican traders carried in a wounded man. Even in the dim light, even bloodied and unconscious, she knew him instantly. Natuche. Her hands flew to the turquoise at her throat. "What happened?" "Soldiers," one of the traders spat. "Ambushed a hunting party near Coyote Springs. This one, he fought like a demon to let the women and children escape. The soldiers, they left him for dead. But he crawled 2 miles to the trade road." Father Francisco appeared, took in the scene with one glance. "Bring him to the back room. Quietly. If Captain Morrison learns we're harboring an Apache warrior." They worked through the night. The wounds were severe, 2 bullet holes, one in his side, another in his thigh. Saber cuts across his chest and arms. Clara's hands moved without her conscious direction, cleaning wounds, preparing poultices from Sister Magdalena's supplies, doing what she'd learned in these months of tending the sick. "You should not be here," Father Francisco said quietly as Clara worked. "If he wakes, if he recognizes you, he saved my life," Clara said simply. "I won't leave him to die alone." Natuche burned with fever for 3 days. In his delirium, he spoke in Apache, sometimes shouting, sometimes whispering. Once, Clara heard him say a name repeatedly. Ayana. His sister, she realized. The one whose turquoise now rested against Clara's heart. She bathed his face with cool water, changed his bandages, spooned broth between his cracked lips when he could swallow. The other sisters whispered among themselves, scandalized that she would tend to a savage, and a man at that. But Sister Magdalena silenced them with sharp words about Christian charity knowing no boundaries. On the fourth night, Clara dozed in the chair beside his bed, exhausted from constant vigil. She woke to find dark eyes watching her, fully conscious for the first time. "You," Natuche whispered, his voice rough as sand. "Don't try to speak," Clara said, reaching for the water pitcher. "You're safe. You're at the mission." He let her help him drink, his eyes never leaving her face. When he'd had enough, he lay back, studying her. "You stayed. The sisters took me in. I've been helping with the sick, trying to—" She stopped, realizing he meant something else entirely. "You saved my life. I couldn't let you die alone." "Better if I had," he said, but without bitterness. "My people, the raid. Some escaped. The traitors said you fought to give them time." A ghost of his old smile touched his scarred face. "As my sister once fought. As you fought." His hand moved slightly on the blanket, and Clara, without thinking, covered it with her own. They sat in silence, hands touching, the night deep around them. Finally, Natuche spoke again. "The stone, you still wear it?" Clara touched the turquoise. "Every day. It helps me remember." "Remember what?" "That kindness can exist in the worst moments. That enemies can choose to be human." She squeezed his hand gently. "That a warrior's protection can save more than just a life." His fingers tightened on hers. "Clara." It was the first time he'd used her name. "What I did, it changed nothing. Your people still hunt mine still raid yours. The wheel turns, and we are all ground beneath it." "You changed me," Clara said fiercely. "That's not nothing." They talked through the night, voices low, sharing pieces of their lives they'd never spoken aloud. Natuche told her about Ayana, how she'd been barely 14 when the soldiers took her, how he'd searched for 3 years before finding her body. Clara told him about Tommy, about the hope chest, about the guilt that ate at her for surviving when so many hadn't. "Your brother may live," Natuche said. "Boys are strong, clever. If he heard the raiders coming." "I tell myself that every day." Clara's voice broke slightly. "But not knowing, it's like a wound that won't heal." "Some wounds are meant to stay open," he said quietly. "They remind us we are still capable of feeling." As dawn approached, exhaustion overtook him again. Clara watched him sleep, memorizing his face. She knew this couldn't last. He would heal and leave, returning to his people if any remained. She would continue her search for Tommy. Their paths had crossed twice by violence and grace, but the world had no place for whatever lay between them. Father Francisco found her there as morning bells rang. His face was troubled. "Captain Morrison returns today. He's heard rumors of a wounded Apache in the area." Clara's blood chilled. "He can't find him here." "No," the priest agreed. "Which is why our guest must leave tonight, ready or not." Clara spent the day preparing. She gathered supplies, food, water, medical herbs. A knife from the kitchen that Sister Magdalena pretended not to see her take. A horse from the mission stable, their oldest and least valuable, but sound enough for a wounded man's journey. As darkness fell, she helped Natuche dress. His wound still seeped, and she knew traveling would likely kill him, but staying meant certain death. "There's a place," he told her as she wrapped his ribs. "Black Canyon, 2 days north. Sacred to my people. If any survived, they might shelter there. You can barely sit a horse. You'll never make it alone." He caught her hands, stilling them. "Clara, what you've done, no one has ever—" He stopped, struggling with words in a language not his own. "My sister's spirit is quiet now. She sees I kept one safe. It is enough." Clara felt tears burning her eyes. "It's not enough. None of this is enough." Footsteps in the corridor made them both freeze. Clara recognized Morrison's voice, demanding to search the mission. Father Francisco's replies were calm but firm. Sanctuary meant sanctuary. "Go," Clara whispered urgently. The back gate. I'll delay them. But Natuche pulled her close, pressing something into her hand. A small leather pouch, worn smooth with age. If you find your brother, he said against her ear, give him this. Tell him it will make him strong. Tell him his sister fought like a warrior. Then he was gone, slipping into the darkness with the fluid grace of his people, despite his wounds. Clara clutched the pouch, feeling small objects shift inside, sacred things, medicine things, a warrior's protection for a boy he'd never met. She composed herself and walked calmly to the front of the mission, where Morrison was arguing with Father Francisco. The captain's eyes lit with suspicion when he saw her. Miss Whitman, how fortunate. We've had reports of Apache raiders in the area. You wouldn't know anything about that. I've been tending the sick, Captain, Clara said evenly. The only Apache I've seen are in my nightmares. Morrison studied her for a long moment, taking in her mission clothes, her calm demeanor, the turquoise she'd no longer bothered to hide. His lip curled. You've gone native, haven't you? Living with these Mexicans and priests, forgetting you're a white woman. I remember exactly who I am, Clara replied. I'm a woman who survived. That's all that matters now. The captain left eventually, finding nothing, but Clara knew he'd be back. She stood in the courtyard, watching the stars, wondering if Natuche could see them too, if he still lived, if he'd reach his sacred canyon. Sister Magdalena found her there near dawn. He's gone then? Yes. And you? Will you go too? Clara touched the pouch Natuche had given her, then the turquoise at her throat. 2 gifts from a warrior who'd lost everything but hadn't let loss make him cruel. Who'd chosen mercy when violence would have been easier. Who'd shown her that humanity wasn't about the color of your skin or the language you spoke, but about the choices you made in your darkest moments. Yes, she said finally. I need to find my brother, and I need... She paused, not sure how to explain the pull she felt, the sense that her story with Natuche wasn't finished. I need to know how this ends. Sister Magdalena nodded, unsurprised. Some journeys we take for others, some we take for ourselves, and some, she smiled sadly, some we take because our souls give us no choice. As the sun rose over the desert, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility, Clara began to plan. She would leave the mission, leave safety, leave certainty. She would search for Tommy, guided by a warrior's blessing. And maybe, somewhere in that vast landscape of loss and hope, she would find Natuche again. Not because she loved him. Love was too simple a word for what lay between them. But because he'd shown her that even in a world torn by violence and hatred, 2 people could choose to see each other's humanity, could choose protection over harm, mercy over revenge, understanding over fear. The turquoise caught the morning light warm against her skin. Somewhere, a scarred warrior rode toward sanctuary, carrying her prayers with him. And Clara Whitman, forever changed, prepared to ride toward her own uncertain fate, carrying his. The news came with the spring thaw. Clara had been searching for 5 months, following every lead, visiting every settlement where a lost boy might have found shelter. She'd learned to travel alone, to defend herself, to read the desert's moods. The turquoise at her throat and Natuche's medicine pouch in her saddlebags were her constant companions. She was in Fort Buchanan, resupplying, when the trader mentioned it casually. Apache band got hit hard last week. Military's been bragging about it, killed most of the warriors, scattered the rest. Clara's hand stilled on the flour sack she'd been examining. Where? Up near Black Canyon. Captain Morrison's unit. They say the Apache were hiding in some sacred place, thought they were safe. The trader spat tobacco juice. Nowhere's safe from the cavalry when they got blood in their eyes. Black Canyon, where Natuche had gone to find his people. Clara paid for her supplies with numb fingers. Outside, she leaned against her horse, fighting nausea. She'd known this was possible, had known the odds of his survival were slim. But knowing and hearing were different things. Miss Whitman? She turned to find a young cavalry sergeant watching her. Yes? Captain Morrison would like a word. He's at the command post. Clara had no choice but to follow. Morrison sat behind a desk covered with maps, his face triumphant. Scalps hung from the wall behind him, trophies of his recent victory. Ah, the Apache lover, he said without preamble. I thought you'd want to know. We found your friend. Clara kept her face still. I don't know what you mean. The scarred one. The one who protected you. Morrison's smile was cruel. He fought hard. I'll give him that. Took 3 of my men with him, but in the end... He gestured to one of the scalps, and Clara had to bite her tongue to keep from crying out. You're mistaken, she managed. I don't know any Apache warriors. No, then you won't mind that we're using what's left of his band for target practice. The women and children, they're being sent to the reservation. Except for one boy, a white boy, about 11. Found him living with them like a little savage. Clara's heart stopped. A white boy? Morrison leaned back, enjoying her reaction. Interested now, are you? Yes, scraggly little thing. Won't speak English anymore, fights like a wildcat. The Apache apparently called him something that means quiet thunder. We're trying to find his people, but if no one claims him, it's the orphan train. Tommy. It had to be Tommy. Where is he? Clara asked, abandoning all pretense. Why should I tell you? Morrison's eyes gleamed. Unless, perhaps you remember more about your captivity now? Locations, numbers, names. Clara stared at him. At this man who hung human scalps like trophies, who spoke of using women and children for target practice. Then she thought of Natush, who'd given everything to protect his people, to protect her. I'll tell you what I remember, she said quietly. I remember a warrior who showed more humanity than any soldier I've met. I remember kindness in the midst of violence. I remember that the real savages aren't always the ones we're told to fear. Morrison's face darkened. You little... The boy, Clara interrupted. Is he my brother or not? Tommy Whitman, from the homestead burned 6 months ago? The captain shuffled papers, his jaw tight. Could be. Age is right, location matches. But he won't answer to any Christian name. Let me see him. And why would I do that? Clara touched the turquoise at her throat, drawing strength from it. Because despite what you think, Captain, I'm still a white woman. A white woman who survived Apache captivity and can testify to that at any hearing or inquiry. How do you think your superiors would react to hearing you denied me the chance to identify my own brother? Morrison's eyes narrowed, but she'd found his weakness, his career, his reputation. Fine, but if you can't make him remember who he is, he goes to the orphan train. They kept Tommy in a locked storeroom. When the door opened, Clara saw a wild-haired boy crouched in the corner, thin and feral, dressed in the remnants of Apache clothing. His eyes, their mother's eyes, were full of rage and fear. Tommy? Clara whispered. The boy snarled something in Apache, but his eyes flickered with recognition before hardening again. Clara knelt slowly, making herself small. Tommy, it's Clara, your sister. She pulled out Natuche's medicine pouch, the one meant for this moment. A friend sent this for you, a warrior named Natuche. The change was instant. Tommy's eyes widened, and he spoke rapidly in Apache. Clara caught Natuche's name several times, along with what sounded like questions. I don't understand, Clara said helplessly. But he saved me, Tommy, just like his people saved you. He is dead. Tommy's English was halting, rusty. Clara's throat tightened. Yes. Tommy's face crumpled. Then, suddenly, he was in her arms, sobbing like the child he still was beneath the warrior training. They found me, he whispered between sobs. In the chest, smoke everywhere. I was dying, and they pulled me out, took me with them, taught me to be strong. Clara held him tight, her own tears falling. I know. Natuche said you might come, said you were brave like his sister, said I should be ready to choose. Tommy pulled back, his young face serious. I choose you, Clara, but they were my family too. They saved me when our people left me to burn. Morrison appeared in the doorway. Well, is it your brother or not? Clara stood, keeping one arm around Tommy. Yes, this is my brother. Good. Get him cleaned up and dressed properly. You can collect him in the morning. Morrison's smile was cold. I'm sure he'll be grateful to be back among civilized people. That night, Clara sat with Tommy in the small room the fort had given them. He told her about his life with the Apache, how they'd trained him, accepted him, made him one of their own. How Natuche had visited sometimes, always asking if Tommy remembered his sister. He said you were the bravest person he knew, Tommy whispered. Said you ran through the desert with an arrow wound. Said you reminded him that enemies could show mercy. Clara touched the turquoise. He saved us both, in different ways. They're sending the others to the reservation, Tommy said suddenly. The women, the children. They'll die there. It's not their land, not their way. He looked at her with eyes too old for his years. We could help them escape. Clara stared at her little brother, this boy who'd survived by becoming something between two worlds. That would be treason. We'd be hunted. Natuche was hunted. He still chose to do what was right. She thought of Morrison's scalp trophies, of Natuche dying to protect his people, of the choice between safety and humanity that defined every soul in this harsh land. Yes, she said finally. He did. They left Fort Buchanan 3 days later. Clara and Tommy Whitman, sister and brother, reunited. They traveled east, ostensibly heading for civilization and a new life. But their path curved north once they were out of sight, toward where the Apache women and children were being held before transport. It was madness. It was treason. It was exactly what Natuche would have done. The medicine pouch hung from Tommy's belt now, clicking softly with each step. The turquoise rested against Clara's heart. Between them, they carried the legacy of a warrior who'd chosen mercy over vengeance, who'd protected the vulnerable even at the cost of his own life. He told me once, Clara said as they rode through the desert darkness, that some wounds are meant to stay open, to remind us we can still feel. Tommy nodded, understanding in a way no 11-year-old should have to. The Apache have a saying, the warrior who shows mercy to an enemy makes the enemy into a brother. Clara thought of Natuche's scarred face, of his gentle hands tending her bonds, of the way he'd stood between her and harm, even when it cost him everything. Yes, she whispered to the desert wind. He did. They rode on through the night, 2 orphans of violence choosing to honor a dead warrior's legacy. The stars watched, silent witnesses to the truth Natuche had understood, that in a world torn by hatred, the greatest rebellion was to choose love. The greatest strength was to protect the weak. The greatest victory was to make your enemy into your brother or sister. Behind them, Fort Buchanan slept, unaware that Clara and Tommy Whitman had chosen their side. And it wasn't the one their blood or birth dictated. It was the side of humanity, taught to them by a scarred Apache warrior who'd seen his sister in a terrified white woman and chosen mercy. The desert swallowed them, as it had swallowed so many others. But they rode with purpose now, guided by turquoise and medicine, by memory and hope. Somewhere ahead, Apache women and children waited in captivity, and somewhere in the spirit world, Natuche watched and approved. The wheel still turned, grinding all beneath it. But sometimes, Clara thought, you could choose which direction to push, even if it cost everything, especially then. The moon was a silver coin in the desert sky when Clara and Tommy reached the temporary holding camp. 23 Apache women and children, all that remained of Natuche's band, huddled behind a makeshift fence of rope and stakes. 2 drowsy soldiers stood guard, never expecting trouble from this direction. Clara had learned much in her months of searching, how to move silently, how to read the land, how to become one with shadows. Tommy moved like the Apache had taught him, each step deliberate and soundless. Together they were ghosts approaching the camp. The rescue, when it came, was swift. Tommy spoke to the captives in Apache while Clara cut the ropes. The women's eyes widened with recognition. This was the white woman Natuche had protected, the boy they had saved from fire. No words were needed beyond that. They fled into the desert night, 25 souls bound by loss and hope. Clara led them north, away from the fort, away from the reservation, toward the hidden canyons where small bands still lived free. It was a 3-day journey through harsh country, and pursuit would come with dawn. An old woman named Dahlia, who spoke broken English, rode beside Clara. Natuche, she said softly, he say you might come. Say if white woman with stone of Ayana comes, we trust. Clara touched the turquoise. He saved me. Now I try to save you. No, Dahlia shook her head. You not save us. You walk with us. Different thing. As the first light of dawn painted the eastern mountains, they heard it. Horses, moving fast. Morrison's cavalry had discovered the escape. "Take them on," Clara told Tommy. "I'll slow the soldiers down." "No!" Tommy's face was fierce. "We stay together." But Clara was already turning her horse. "This is my choice, little brother. Natucci made his. Now I make mine." She pressed the turquoise into his hand. "Give this to Dahlia. Tell her it goes home now." Before Tommy could protest further, Clara spurred her horse back the way they'd come. She would lead Morrison away, buy the others time. It was all she could do. She met the cavalry at Skeleton Ridge, sitting her horse calmly as 20 soldiers surrounded her. Morrison's face was purple with rage. "You treasonous witch!" he snarled. "You'll hang for this." "Perhaps," Clara said. "But they'll live, and Natucci's sacrifice won't be wasted." Morrison raised his pistol, and Clara thought this was how it would end. But another voice cut through the morning air. "Captain Morrison." Colonel Marcus Webb, Morrison's superior, rode into view with his own detachment. His weathered face was grave as he took in the scene. "Colonel," Morrison started, "this woman, I know what she's done, Captain." Webb's voice was steady. "I also know what you've done, the trophies in your office, the reports of unnecessary brutality, the massacre at Black Canyon that you reported as a battle." Morrison went white. "Sir, You're relieved of command, Captain. Report to Fort Grant for court-martial proceedings." Webb turned to Clara. "Miss Whitman, you're under arrest. But given the circumstances, I think we can discuss alternatives to hanging." The ride back to Fort Buchanan was surreal. Colonel Webb rode beside Clara, his manner more curious than hostile. "Natucci," he said finally. "I knew him years ago, before the wars got so bad. He was different from the others. Spoke of peace when everyone else spoke of war. He was a good man," Clara said simply. "Perhaps, or perhaps he was just a man trying to be good in a world that made it nearly impossible." Webb studied her. "Like you, Miss Whitman." The trial, such as it was, took place a week later. Clara stood before a military tribunal, unrepentant. She told them about Natucci's protection, about finding Tommy with the Apache, about choosing humanity over law. "You admit to treason?" the prosecutor demanded. "I admit to doing what was right," Clara replied. In the end, it was Tommy's testimony that swayed them. The boy stood straight and spoke clearly about how the Apache had saved him, raised him, loved him. How Natucci had told stories of Clara's bravery. How choosing sides based on skin color made no sense when kindness and cruelty existed in all peoples. The sentence was exile. Clara and Tommy were forbidden from returning to Arizona territory, their property forfeit, their names struck from decent society's rolls. They were given horses and supplies and told to leave immediately. They rode east in silence for the first hour. Then Tommy spoke. "Where will we go?" Clara thought of the vast continent stretching before them, of all the places where their story wasn't known, where they could start fresh. "Somewhere new," she said. "Somewhere we can choose who to be." "I want to be like him," Tommy said quietly. "Like Natucci, strong enough to choose mercy." Clara smiled through her tears. "Then that's who you'll be." They made camp that night by a small spring. Tommy pulled out the medicine pouch Natucci had given him, revealing its contents for the first time. Inside were small tokens, an eagle feather, a piece of flint, seeds from a desert plant, and folded small, a piece of paper with words written in a missionary's careful hand. Tommy read aloud, "For the boy who will choose between worlds, be stronger than hate, be braver than fear. Remember, the warrior who shows mercy makes the enemy into a brother." Clara took the paper with trembling hands. Below those words, in different ink, clearly added later, "Tell her she set me free. Tell her Ayanna smiles now." They sat in silence as the stars emerged, brilliant in the clear sky. Somewhere out there, the Apache women and children had found sanctuary. Somewhere else, Morrison faced justice for his cruelties. And somewhere beyond it all, in whatever land the spirits dwelt, a scarred warrior finally rested. "We never really knew each other," Clara said softly. "A handful of conversations, a few shared moments. He didn't even know my last name until the end." "Did it matter?" Tommy asked. Clara considered this. "No. What mattered was that in my worst moment, he saw me as human. And in his worst moment, I tried to do the same. She touched her shoulder where the arrow scar would always remind her of her flight to freedom. He didn't steal anything from me, Tommy. He gave me something, the knowledge that grace can bloom anywhere, even between enemies. Tommy leaned against her, young and old at once. What do we do now? We live, Clara said. We carry their stories. We choose mercy when the world chooses hate. We remember that Apache and white, Mexican and American, we're all just people trying to survive in a hard land. A coyote howled in the distance, and Tommy smiled. The Apache say coyotes are tricksters, but also teachers. What do they teach? That things aren't always what they seem. That wisdom can wear surprising faces. He looked up at her. That sometimes the enemy is the one who saves you. Clara pulled him close, this brother who'd lived between worlds and chosen to bridge them rather than pick a side. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the human divisions below. She thought of Natuche's words, he who seeks. He'd sought his sister and found her in Clara, sought redemption and found it in mercy, sought peace and found it in sacrifice. Don't raise my skirt, please, she had whispered in terror all those months ago. And he hadn't. He'd raised her understanding instead. Raised her above the fear and prejudice that poisoned the frontier. Raised her to see that the true savagery was in refusing to see the humanity in others. His soul had never been free after that moment, bound to her by the choice to protect rather than take. But in that binding, perhaps he'd found the freedom he'd truly sought. The freedom from hate, from the cycle of vengeance, from the weight of his sister's ghost. Now Clara carried that freedom forward, into whatever life awaited them beyond the horizon. She was no longer the frightened girl who'd begged for mercy. She was a woman who'd learned that mercy freely given could transform both giver and receiver. The desert night wrapped around them like a blanket, and Clara Whitman closed her eyes, finally at peace. Somewhere, Ayanna smiled. Somewhere, Natuche rested. And here, under the vast sky, two survivors chose to live as bridges between worlds, honoring a warrior who'd shown them the way. The wheel still turned, but they had learned the secret. You could choose which direction to help it turn, toward hate or love, toward division or unity, toward the past or the future. They chose the future and rode toward it with the dawn. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West, where love and humanity bloomed in the harshest ground. Where are you listening to this story from? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's connect across the miles, just as Clara and Natuche connected across worlds. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and tell us what moved you most about their journey. Until next time, remember, mercy makes us all brothers and sisters under the same vast sky.